The Wind in the Willows, Chapter 11, Part 2. Toad was quite alarmed at this very serious and pretentious style of greeting, but the rat whispered to him, "Never mind, don't take any notice, and don't say anything to him just yet. He's always rather low and despondent when he's wanting his victuals. In half an hour's time, he'll be quite a different animal." So they waited in silence, and presently there came another and a lighter knock. The rat, with a nod to Toad, went to the door and ushered in a mole, very shabby and unwashed, with bits of hay and straw sticking to his fur. "Hooray! Here's old Toad!" cried the mole, his face beaming. "Fancy having you back!" And he began to dance around him. "We never dreamed you would turn up so soon. Why, you must have managed to escape, you clever, ingenious, intelligent Toad." The rat, alarmed, pulled him by the elbow, but it was too late. Toad was puffing and swelling already. "Clever? Oh no," he said. "I'm not really clever, according to my friends. I've broken out of the strongest prison in England, that's all, and captured a railway train and escaped on it, that's all, and disguised myself and gone about the country humbugging everyone, that's all. Oh no, I'm a stupid ass, I am. I tell you one or two of my little adventures, Mole, and you shall judge for yourself." "Well, well," said the mole, moving towards the supper table. "Supposing you talk while I eat. Not a bite since breakfast. Oh my, and he sat down and helped himself liberally to the cold beef and pickles. Toad straddled out to the hearth-rug, thrust his paws into his trouser pockets, and pulled out a handful of silver. "Look at that," he cried, displaying it. "That's not so bad, is it, for a few minutes' work? And how do you think I done it, Mole? Horse stealing, that's how I done it." "Go on, Toad," the mole said, immensely interested. "Toad, do be quiet, please," said the rat, "and don't you egg him on, Mole. Why, you know what he is. But please tell us as soon as possible what the position is and what's best to be done, now the Toad is back at last." "The position's about as bad as it can be," replied the mole grumpily. "And as for what's to be done, why, blessed if I know. The badger and I have been round and round the place by night and by day, always the same thing. Sentries posted everywhere, guns poking out at us, stones thrown at us, always an animal on the lookout, and when they see us, my, how they do laugh. That's what annoys me the most." "It's a very difficult situation," said the rat, reflecting deeply, "but I think I see now, in the depths of my mind, what Toad really ought to do. I will tell you. He ought to—" "No, he aren't," shouted the mole, with his mouth full. "Nothing of the sort. You don't understand. What he ought to do, he ought to—" "Well, I shan't do it anyway," cried Toad, getting excited. "I'm not going to be ordered about by you fellows. It's my horse we're talking about. I know exactly what to do, and I'll tell you, I'm going to—" But by the time the three were talking at once, at the top of their voices, and the noise was simply deafening, when a thin, dry voice made itself heard, saying, "Be quiet at once, all of you," and instantly everyone was silent. It was Badger, who, having finished his pie, had turned around in his chair and was looking at them severely. When he saw that he had secured their attention, and that they were evidently waiting for him to address them, he turned back to the table again and reached out for the cheese. And so great was the respect commanded by the solid qualities of that admirable animal that not another word was uttered until he had quite finished his repast and brushed the crumbs from his knees. The Toad fidgeted a good deal, but the rat held him firmly down. When the badger had quite done, he got up from his seat and stood by the fireplace, reflecting deeply. At last he spoke. "Toad," he said severely, "you bad, troublesome little animal, aren't you ashamed of yourself? What do you think your father, my old friend, would have said if he had been here tonight and known of all your goings-on?" Toad, who was by the sofa by this time, with his legs up, rolled over onto his face, shaken by sobs of contrition. There, went on Badger more kindly. "Never mind. Stop crying. We're going to let bygones be bygones and try and turn over a new leaf. But what the mole says is quite true. The stoats are on guard at every point, and they make the best sentries in the world. It's quite useless to think of attacking the place. They're too strong for us. Then it's all over," sobbed the Toad, crying into sofa cushions. "I shall go and enlist for a soldier and never see my dear Toad Hall any more." Come, cheer up, Toady, said the Badger. There are more ways of getting back a place than by taking it by storm. I haven't said my last word yet. Now I'm going to tell you a great secret. Toad sat up slowly and dried his eyes. Secrets had an immense attraction for him, because he could never keep one, and he enjoyed the sort of unhallowed thrill he experienced when he went and told another animal, after having faithfully promised not to. There is an underground passage, said the Badger impressively, that leads from the river bank, quite near here, right up into the middle of Toad Hall. Oh, nonsense, Badger, said Toad rather airily. You've been listening to some of those yarns they spin in the public houses about here. I know every inch of Toad Hall, inside and out. Nothing of the sort, I do assure you. My young friend, said the Badger with great severity, your father, who was a worthy animal, a lot worthier than some others I know, was a particular friend of mine, and told me a great deal he wouldn't have dreamed of telling you. He discovered that passage. He didn't make it, of course. That was done hundreds of years before he ever came to live there, and he repaired it and cleaned it out, because he thought it might come in useful some day, in case of trouble or danger, and he showed it to me. Don't let my son know about it, he said. He's a good boy, but very light and volatile in character, and simply cannot hold his tongue. If he's ever in a real fix, it would be a use to him. You may tell him about the secret passage, but not before. The other animals looked hard at Toad to see how he would take it. Toad was inclined to be sulky at first, but he brightened up immediately, like a good fellow he was. Well, well, he said, perhaps I'm a bit of a talker, a popular fellow such as I am. My friends got round me. We chaff, we sparkle, we tell witty stories, and somehow my tongue gets wagging. I have the gift of conversation. I've been told I ought to have a salon, whatever that may be. Never mind, go on, Badger. How's this passage of yours going to help us? I found out a thing or two lately, continued the Badger. I got Otter to disguise himself as a sweep and call at the back door with brushes over his shoulder, asking for a job. There's going to be a big banquet tomorrow night. It's somebody's birthday, the Chief Weasel's, I believe, and all the weasels will be gathering together in the dining hall, eating and drinking and laughing and carrying on, suspecting nothing. No guns, no swords, no sticks, no arms of any sort whatsoever. But the sentials will be posted as usual, remarked the Rat. Exactly, said the Badger. That is my point. The weasels will trust entirely to their excellent sentials, and that is where the passage comes in. That very useful tunnel leads right up under the butler's pantry, next to the dining hall. Aha! That squeaky board in the butler's pantry, said Toad. Now I understand it. We shall creep out quietly into the butler's pantry, cried the Mole. With our pistols and swords and sticks, shouted the Rat. And rush in upon them, said the Badger. And whack 'em, and whack 'em, and whack 'em, cried the Toad, in ecstasy, running around and round the room and jumping over chairs. Very well then, said the Badger, resuming his usual dry manner. Our plan is settled, and there's nothing more for you to argue or squabble about. So, as it's getting very late, all of you go right off to bed at once. We will make all the necessary arrangements in the course of the morning tomorrow. Toad, of course, went to bed dutifully with the rest. He knew better than to refuse, though he was feeling much too excited to sleep. But he'd had a long day, with many events crowded into it, and sheets and blankets were very friendly and comforting things. After plain straw, and not too much of it, spread on the stone floor of a draughty cell, and his head had not been many seconds on his pillow before he was snoring happily. Naturally, he dreamed a good deal, about roads that ran away from him, just when he wanted them, and canals that chased him and caught him, and a barge that sailed into the banqueting hall in his week's washing, just as he was given a dinner party, and he was alone in the secret passage, pushing onwards, but it twisted and turned around and shook itself, and sat upon its end, yet somehow, at the last, he found himself back in Toad Hall, safe and triumphant, with all his friends gathered round him, earnestly assuring him that he really was a clever toad. He slept till the late hour next morning, and by the time he got down, he found the other animals had finished their breakfast some time before. The mole had slipped off somewhere by himself, without telling anyone where he was going. The badger sat in the armchair, reading the paper, and not concerning himself in the slightest about what was going to happen that evening. The rat, on the other hand, was running around the room busily with his arms full of weapons of every kind, distributing them to the 4 little heaps on the floor, and saying excitedly under his breath as he ran, "Here's a sword for the rat, here's a sword for the mole, here's a sword for the toad, here's a sword for the badger, here's a pistol for the rat, here's a pistol for the mole, here's a pistol for the toad, here's a pistol for the badger," and so on, in a regular, rhythmic way, while the little 4 heaps gradually grew and grew. "That's all very well, rat," said the badger presently, looking at the busy little animal over the edge of his newspaper. "I'm not blaming you, but just let us once get past the stoats with those detestable guns of theirs, and I assure you we shan't want any swords or pistols. We 4, with our sticks, once inside the dining hall, why, we shall clear the floor of all the lot of them in 5 minutes. I'd have done the whole thing by myself, only I didn't want to deprive you fellows of the fun." "It's as well to be on the safe side," said the rat reflectively, polishing a pistol barrel on his sleeve and looking at it. The toad, having finished his breakfast, picked up a stout stick and swung it vigorously, belabouring imaginary animals. "I'll learn 'em to steal my house," he cried. "I'll learn 'em, I'll learn 'em." "Don't say learn 'em, Toad," said the rat, greatly shocked. "It's not good English." "Why are you always nagging Toad for?" inquired the badger, rather peevishly. "What's the matter with his English? It's the same what I use myself, and if it's not good enough for me, and if it's good enough for me, it ought to be good enough for you." "I'm very sorry," said the rat humbly, "only I think it ought to be teach 'em, not learn 'em." "But we don't want to teach them," replied the badger. "We want to learn 'em, learn 'em, learn 'em, and what's more, we're going to do it too." "Oh, very well, have it your way," said the rat. He was getting rather muddled about it himself, and presently he retired into a corner where he could be heard murmuring, "Learn 'em, teach 'em, learn 'em," till the badger told him rather sharply to leave off. Presently the mole came tumbling into the room, evidently very pleased with himself. "I've been getting a rise out of the stoats." "I hope you've been very careful, Mole," said the rat anxiously. "I should hope so too," said the mole confidently. "I got the idea when I went into the kitchen to see about Toad's breakfast being kept hot for him. I found the old washerwoman dress that he came home in yesterday hanging on a towel horse before the fire, so I put it on, and the bonnet as well, the shawl, and I went off to Toad Hall, as bold as you please. The sentries were on the lookout, of course, with their guns and their 'Who comes there?' and all the rest of that nonsense. 'Good morning, gentlemen,' says I, very respectfully. 'Want any washing done today?' They looked at me very proud and stiff and haughty, and said, 'Go away, washerwoman. We don't do any washing on duty, or any other time,' says I. Ho, 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 wasn't I funny, Toad?" "Poor frivolous animal," said the toad very loftily. The fact is, he felt exceedingly jealous of the mole for what he'd just done. It was exactly what he would have liked to have done himself, if only he had thought of it first, and hadn't gone and overslept himself. "Some of the stoats turned quite pink," cried the mole. "And the sergeant in charge, he said to me, very short, he said, 'Now run away, my good woman, run away. Don't keep my men idling and talking on the posts. Run away,' says I. 'It won't be me that'll be running away in a very short time from now.'" "Oh, Moley, how could you?" said the rat, dismayed. The badger laid down his paper. "I could see 'em pricking up their ears and looking at each other," went on the mole, "and the sergeant said to them, 'Never mind her, she doesn't know what she's talking about.'" "Oh, don't I?" said I. "Well, let me tell you this. My daughter, she washes for Mr. Badger, and that'll show you whether I know what I'm talking about, and you'll know pretty soon too. 100 bloodthirsty badgers, armed with rifles, are going to attack Toad Hall this very night by the way of the paddock. 6 boatloads of rats with pistols and cutlasses will come up the river and effect a landing on the garden, while a picked body of toads, known as the diehards, or the death or glory toads, will storm the orchard and carry everything before them, yelling for vengeance. There won't be much left of you to wash by the time they've done with you, unless you clear out while you've had the chance. Then I ran away, and when I was out of sight, I hid, and presently I came creeping back along the ditch and took a peep at them through the hedge. They were all as nervous and flustered as I could be, running all away at once and falling over each other, and everyone giving orders to everybody else and not listening, and the sergeant kept sending off parties of stoats to distant parties of the grounds, and then sending other fellows to fetch them back again, and I heard them saying to each other, "That's just like the weasels. They're to stop comfortably in the banqueting hall and have feasting and toasts and songs and all sorts of fun, while we must stay on guard in the cold and the dark, and in the end be cut to pieces by bloodthirsty badgers." "Oh, you silly ass, Mole," cried Toad. "You've been and spoiled everything." "Mole," said the Badger in his dry, quiet way, "I perceive you have more sense in your little finger than some other animals have in the whole of their fat bodies. You've managed excellently, and I begin to have great hopes of you. Good Mole, clever Mole." The Toad was simply wild with jealousy, more especially as he couldn't make out for the life of him what the Mole had done that was so particularly clever. But, fortunately for him, before he could show temper or expose himself to the Badger's sarcasm, the bell rang for luncheon. It was a simple but sustaining meal, bacon and broad beans and a macaroni pudding. And when they had quite done, the Badger settled himself into an armchair and said, "Well, we've got our work cut out for us tonight, and it'll probably be pretty late before we're quite through with it. So I'm going to take 40 winks while I can." And he drew a handkerchief over his face, and soon he was snoring. The anxious and laborious Rat at once resumed his preparations and started running between his four little heaps, muttering, "Here's about for the Rat, here's about for the Mole, here's about for the Toad, here's about for the Badger," and so on, with every fresh accoutrement he produced, to which there seemed really no end. So the Mole drew his arm through Toad's, led him out into the open air, shoved him into the wicker chair, and made him tell him all his adventures from the beginning to the end, which Toad was only too willing to do. The Mole was a good listener, and Toad, with no one to check his statements or to criticise his unfriendly spirit, rather let himself go. Indeed, much that he related belonged more properly to the category of what might have happened had I thought of it in time, instead of 10 minutes after. Though those are always the best and the raciest adventures, and why should they not be truly ours, as much as somewhat inadequate things that really come off?